My name is Pat Leahy and I'm the former Assistant Commissioner for Dublin. In 2011, I was working in Dublin's North Inner City and I was the Chief Superintendent there.
Queen Elizabeth has been pleased to accept an invitation to pay a state visit to Ireland in the spring of this year. In the history of the Irish state, there has never been an official visit by a British monarch to Ireland. That is about to change.
From the day that it was announced, the pressure was on.
This was the biggest policing security operation in the history of the state.
The intelligence and the information about potential attacks was coming in almost daily.
There was still quite a considerable rump of dissident Republicans active on the island.
Certainly some of those groups had the capability of mounting terrorist attacks.
We knew that there was attempts being made to breach security.
In the vehicle was paraphernalia used in the making of the pipe bomb.
This is the type of person that we fear in protection operations. Lone wolves are hard people to detect.
The critical phone call came in that there was another bomb.
It's the last place that you need to start panicking.
The formal announcement that the visit was on, I think came on the 4th of March, and the landing was going to take place on the 17th of May. So for us, this was a timescale that it was challenging from the word go.
April 2011. President Mary McAleese invited Queen Elizabeth II to visit Ireland.
Everybody took a sharp intake of breath when they saw the timescale that we had here to actually get the planning right for it and to put everything in place. We knew we had 8-9 weeks to plan for the biggest security event of our lives.
The visit would mark the first time a British monarch had set foot on Irish soil in 100 years.
First and foremost, obviously, because of the role we had, security was first, in our minds. But very, very quickly, we realised it was far bigger than that. There was a historical piece to it. There was a huge political aspect to it. And Garda Síochána itself was going to be operating in a fishbowl here, and the reputational damage potential was great. Not only for the Guards, of course, but for the state itself.
My name is Jane Ohlmeyer, and I'm Professor of Modern History at Trinity College, Dublin. As a historian, I was actually quite surprised because I knew just how controversial the visit might be, but I was also pleased because I think that the visit and the invitation from Ireland was really a sign that we were ready, that we'd sort of grown up almost. We were very comfortable welcoming Queen Elizabeth II as any other head of state.
I think my first reaction was Janie Mac, I hope nothing happens to her. I think that was sort of everybody's first reaction to some extent.
Journalist Lee's Hand joined the press corps to follow the visit.
As a professional, I was massively excited because I knew this was going to be absolutely huge. This would be something that would, garner an enormous amount of international attention. And I would be privileged enough to have a ringside seat of everything that unfolded, good or bad.
The threat was very real indeed. For dissident Republicans, they saw the Queen and her entourage as perfectly legitimate military targets. And for that reason, any sort of visit actually carried tremendous risks.
The last ruling British monarch to visit Ireland was King George V in 1911, a decade before independence. 100 years later, a very different Ireland awaited his granddaughter.
This visit in 2011 was enormously historic because it was the first time the Queen of England was visiting the Republic of Ireland since we had become independent. And the visit had really been impossible because of the conflict in Northern Ireland. It was much more difficult for the Queen or members of her family to visit Ireland because the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, had explicitly said they were going to target anybody associated with Britain and empire.
In 1979, the IRA fulfilled that threat when it assassinated the Queen's cousin, Lord Mountbatten.
He had a family holiday house in Sligo. He'd been repeatedly told, "You're not welcome, don't come." He'd continued to come, and eventually the IRA murdered him and other members of his family. That, of course, then heightened the security threat when it came to any royal visits coming to the Republic of Ireland.
The scale was just off the charts in terms of security. It was the biggest security operation that we were ever going to be involved in, and we'd been involved in quite big ones before that, but this was something different.
Garda immediately began to train for the worst.
Before she arrived, I mean, there was a huge amount of nervousness on the behalf of the government, the security forces. I think particularly because they've been caught out a few times before. I mean, if you go back to events like, say, in 2006, there was the Love Ulster riot when there was a running battle on O'Connell Street, when a loyalist group came down to protest, and they were met, obviously, by a counter-protest, and all hell broke loose. A lot of the guards got it in the neck for that. So I think this time they were absolutely determined that nothing would go wrong.
When the details of the itinerary started to emerge, my response was, well, these are all the key areas that we're guaranteed there's going to be a response to this.
At the time, Peter Hunt was a royal correspondent reporting on the visit.
It was the culmination of a very, very long process. There'd have been two key choices. Do they go for a safe visit, or they could have gone for a braver visit? And as history now shows us, they went for the brave approach.
The Queen chose to visit some of the most historically contentious sites in Ireland.
Places like the Garden of Remembrance, Croke Park. She was heading for the most sacred place we had in the city in terms of republicanism and history, and it was really, really sensitive. There is definitely going to be a response to this. We're going to have to gear up for this. Our security plan is going to have to be so sharp. If it was your area that it failed, and if it was going to fail, then that was a career-ending move.
The Queen's route would take her down O'Connell Street, the city's main thoroughfare, and the site of the General Post Office, the very birthplace of the fight for Irish independence.
This is the location that kept me up at night. I had sleepless nights over O'Connell Street. Right in the middle of it, we have the GPO. The GPO is a significant location for a lot of groups. I mean, this was, Republican Mecca. But look at the size of it. It's a boulevard. You have streets running right and left off it. You have a railway track running down through the middle of it. It is a huge space to secure. But it's not just about the size and the scale and blocking off the streets. You have to look at all the street furniture, the bins, the shores, the manholes. Every manhole here has to be lifted. It has to be searched by a dive unit. Once it was inspected, it needed to be sealed. Even the trees had to be inspected. We had to clear everything. And look at the height of the buildings. We had observer marksmen on these buildings to help us secure it. Every shop owner, pub, club, restaurant, office, we have to determine who owns it, who works there, how are we going to manage it during the actual visit. And that's just here for O'Connell Street. Every route that the Queen travelled on had to be cleared, and clearing it means clear everything. It's nightmare stuff for policing.
Just a few hundred meters further on was another politically charged location, the Garden of Remembrance, a monument to the Irish who gave their lives for independence from the British Crown. This would be Queen Elizabeth's first stop.
This is my division. I'm responsible for the Garden of Remembrance, the most contentious site that she's going to visit. We had spent weeks and weeks in here, teams of searchers clearing the ground. We had the divers in here, we had the dogs in here. We dug all the ground behind the actual monument itself to make sure that nothing was here, nothing had been planted in advance, and then we had to secure it, which means we had to hold it. From the first time we searched it, we had to hold it continuously, 24/7, right up to the time that she was in and gone. It was the first encounter, the first engagement. It had to work. It had to be successful. There was no other option.
But for some, the Queen was not welcome.
I mean, some very high-profile figures within Ireland actually came out against the visit.
Like your own thoughts about the proposed visit of the Queen in May to the country?
Well, I don't think the Queen should come. I think it's premature. I think it's too soon.
There were also open threats of violence from dissident Republican organizations.
At that stage, there was a right alphabet soup of, say, splinter Republican groups, things like Erigi, Continuity IRA, Real IRA. So a lot of the more strident opposition came from them. I think that these groups were just really just trying to drag the whole thing back to the bad old days.
Mick Feehan is my name. In 2011, I was the Assistant Commissioner in charge in the Dublin region in Garda Síochána. When the Queen's visit was announced, certainly some of the dissident Republican organisations indicated that they were going to interfere with the visit, and if they could prevent the visit happening in the first place, that's what they would do. Certainly some of those groups had the capability of mounting terrorist attacks.
The threats began to emerge almost immediately after the announcement was made. They were coming in from the word go.
Threats around improvised explosive devices, I would say, were like snuff at a wake in the couple of months leading up to the actual visit, and that ratcheted up, you know, as we got closer to it. There were monuments around the city which were obviously linked, you know, to the time of British rule here. There were IEDs, improvised explosive devices, placed in some of those. So certainly the number of calls and the number of call-outs for the Army Explosive Ordnance Team had certainly ratcheted up in the 6 weeks before the visit. Certainly unprecedented in my experience, and I've had 35 years in Garda Síochána.
Every threat, whether real or a hoax, was designed to stretch Garda resources and cause disruption.
There were a significant number of threats made, and we had to investigate every one of them. And every piece of information, every piece of intelligence had to be chased down. You know, we had to accept every threat as being credible until we decided it was not.
John O'Mahony. In 2011, I was the Assistant Commissioner with responsibility for intelligence, criminal organised crime and terrorism. Sometime after 8 p.m. on the Monday evening, the 16th, a short period of time before the Queen landed, there was a call made to Longford Garda Station. That call was a very short duration. A man informed them that there was a bomb on a bus going from Ballina to Dublin. When we intercepted that bus, sure enough, there was a significant device on board, and it was in the hold where the luggage is put into the bus. It was in a plastic bag. There was also a timing device. It was attached to a plastic container. It was nearly full of a liquid accelerant, and the pipe bomb itself was attached to the bottle.
It was described to me as this was an IED firebomb. The Army EOD team were called out, and they examined the device, made it safe, and they advised that this was a viable improvised explosive device, which, had it gone off, certainly had the potential to kill.
We had no intelligence on it. It was coming out of the blue. That unknown entity that you fear, you always fear for the unknown, and it did happen.
The discovery of a viable bomb from an unknown source now threatened the entire security operation.
Immediately, we had to start a process where we would deal with it. We had to put resources into carrying out an investigation, securing intelligence if we could. Lots of questions there. How did it happen? We would have been happy from our intelligence sources that it wasn't dissident Republican groups. So in effect, I suppose, we had a person who was a lone wolf on our doorstep.
This is the type of person that we fear in protection operations. Lone wolves are hard people to detect.
May 17th, 2011, the day Queen Elizabeth II is due to make the first visit to Ireland by a British monarch in 100 years.
This wasn't any old royal visit. This was a royal visit that was making history. Let's not kid ourselves. The symbolism of this was massive.
The reputation of the state was on the line, and this is how we felt about it.
But there was a core of opposition determined to disrupt the visit.
There were people that had violence in mind, and they were intent on doing harm if they could. We were dealing with something else in the background all the time. We knew that there was attempts being made to breach security.
Just the night before, Garda in Longford received a bomb threat. A caller claimed there was an explosive device on a bus travelling towards Dublin. This time, it was no hoax.
When it was examined, it was found that it was a viable device and it was capable of causing a blast.
Gardaí were convinced the bomber was not connected to any of the terrorist organisations they were monitoring, but was acting alone.
That's the biggest difficulty for any security agency, that you have somebody acting on their own, because getting intelligence from other people, it's not an option. Garda in Longford were now tasked with carrying out an investigation into the phone call with a view to identifying who had made it and the reason behind making it.
We were letting nothing go. It gives you a heads up, but there was no higher plane that we could get to from a security perspective. We were there.
With Gardaí now on the hunt for an active lone wolf bomber, Queen Elizabeth's plane approached Baldonnel airfield.
Nobody really knew what to expect. That was the thing. I mean, this was a once-off. We'd never seen anything like this before. So, I mean, everybody tuned in to watch the plane land.
I can remember watching the plane coming in. I was inside in the control room in Store Street at the time, watching it on a big screen. Everybody's still waiting. You know, is she going to touch down? Is it going to land? Is there going to be some cancellation at the last minute?
I think the steps came down, and next thing she emerged, dressed in green, with a massive smile on her face. And everybody went, oh. I mean, it was almost sort of like, okay, she's obviously, setting the tone on this.
She made a huge impression, and I think huge care had gone into selecting her wardrobe throughout the visit. She was wearing a beautiful green outfit, and it was the beginning of a charm offensive, because you could see from the very second that she stepped off that plane that she really was trying very hard indeed to show tremendous respect for Ireland and everything Irish.
The Queen's safety was now the responsibility of the Irish state. Kevin Donoghue was the Garda in charge of her security detail.
2011, I was responsible for what we call the Special Detective Unit, which is a national unit, deals with all national security issues around counter-terrorism, counterintelligence and executive protection. My job and the job of the Special Detective Unit was to ensure that the Queen would not be harmed. At the extreme, you're looking at dissident Republicans or somebody trying to take a shot at her with a firearm. And at the other level, and which could be as embarrassing for the country as somebody lobbing an egg or a tomato at the car, all of the things we've put in place are now going to be tested. And we need to know that we're ready to respond.
While his colleagues in Longford hunted for the bomber, Kevin and his team escorted the Queen and Prince Philip to Áras an Uachtaráin.
Today, President McAleese fulfilled a long-time ambition, formally welcoming the head of state of our nearest neighbour on a first official visit. Inside the Áras, the Queen and her husband were introduced to the Taoiseach, Mr Kenny, before both signed the Visitors Book. The last reigning British monarch to visit this building, and indeed Dublin, was the Queen's grandfather, King George V, exactly a century ago in June 1911.
She next begins her journey into the city centre, where, unusually for Queen Elizabeth, she would pass through empty streets.
The city centre was in lockdown. It was deserted. So, I mean, it really was unprecedented and really quite extraordinary. And I think, again, why we were terrified that something bad was going to happen.
One of the challenges we had was to find a balance between allowing people to experience the visit of the Queen, but we had to balance that with the threat level that we had. And we did our best, but they were really sensitive sites. So we had to, you know, bring the security element to the fore.
I've never seen security in Dublin like what we experienced back in 2011. There were snipers on the roof in Trinity. People had gone down manholes to make sure there were no bombs in drains.
I cannot think of a comparable example where she literally went from sort of one secure zone to another without encountering any sort of normal people on the street who were interested in seeing her being driven past. You know, the Queen is used to being driven or walking through people where people applaud her, instead of which she saw empty streets, most notably in Dublin. So that will have been psychologically quite challenging.
But Pat and his team were not prepared to take any risks.
If we could get over the first two hurdles on this, the Garden of Remembrance, the GPO, O'Connell Street, it would take some of the pressure off everybody else. These were the ones that people were holding their breath about.
With the Queen only 20 minutes away, Pat faced an emergency. A group of protesters had gathered at the GPO and were confronting Garda.
They were intent on blocking the cavalcade, and that was it. So it started almost immediately.
So they take up their position on the road between the GPO and the top of Henry Street, the spire here behind us. And of course, the protesters refuse to move. They sit down and they're going to put it up to us. They're going to disrupt the Queen's visit. We were potentially looking at saying the road is blocked. Her primary route is blocked. We give them another opportunity to leave and they're refusing point blank. We're getting into that time frame of a go, no-go scenario with the people that are bringing her into us. After considering all of the options that we have here, we have to go hands-on. So the guards move in, they start lifting them 3 to 1, 3 guards to 1 person, safest option we have. There's a little bit of argy-bargy. We have to take them around the corner onto the top of Henry Street, and we have to have a line of guards there to stop them coming back.
Just minutes later, Queen Elizabeth passed an apparently peaceful GPO and Henry Street and continued towards the Garden of Remembrance.
In a day of history-making, a scene that will long be remembered, Queen Elizabeth II's motorcade arriving at the Garden of Remembrance in Dublin.
The Garden of Remembrance is such an incredibly important and symbolic and significant place in the Irish, pantheon of sacred sites. I mean, it commemorates our war dead, starting from the 1798 rebellion straight through to 1916.
Over the years, many world leaders have come here to pay their respects to the founders of this state, but never until today a British monarch.
At that very moment, Pat was made aware of a new threat, just a couple of 100 meters away.
The atmosphere here was very tense. From the word go, it was tense. I'm hearing in my ear that something is happening up here at the junction of North Frederick Street and Dorset Street.
While we're arriving in the Garden of Remembrance, there is a protest up in Dorset Street. We had our helicopter in the air, so that's transmitting pictures down to a certain number of people. Chief Superintendent Leahy is heading up that side of it in Dorset Street. I'm down at the Garden of Remembrance, and at our control is Assistant Commissioner Feehan.
I'm located in the command and control room in Harcourt Square. We have a bank of monitors in front of us, so I can see what's happening on the ground in Dorset Street, from various angles. I can also see what's happening in the Garden of Remembrance at the same time.
Now, the Queen is after arriving. She's about 200 metres down here. We're probably talking about maybe 200, 250 people here in the junction. There's a lot of pushing and shoving going on, and they could see the cavalcade pulling up, so they knew she had a right.
As the protesters continued to gather on Dorset Street, at the Garden of Remembrance, a ceremony unprecedented in Irish history was getting underway.
Of course, the noise, increased at that stage, and the protest really took off.
And the stones started, and ball bearings and glass, and I can remember standing in the road. They had their shields up. They were protecting me with their shields because they were in full public order, and the rocks were hopping off the shields. One inspector turned to walk away, and as he did, a petrol bomb smashed just at his feet. And as he walked into the flames, his legs caught fire. And I can remember thinking, he didn't miss a beat. He just kept walking as if nothing had happened. And I can remember thinking, this guy knows his stuff. To the guards that were on the front line, it just said, relax everybody, we're okay.
We had flares been fired at the public order unit, flares which would normally be used, say, for safety at sea. We had fireworks been thrown at the guards, some of which had live rounds of ammunition attached to them, in the hope that when the firework went off, the live ammunition might go off as well. A huge amount of missiles, and it was a pretty violent riot.
There was a corps in there that were intent on causing harm and injuring Garda. And I can remember they started throwing the fireworks and the bangers into the guards. And guards knowing in their heads that there had been viable devices found. This is a real fear tactic that was thrown at them. They knew that there were live threats out there, but they stood on the line. And I had spoken to the Lawson before and afterwards. They knew what was at stake. They knew what was at stake for our country, and they stood there, and they stood there again and again. So they were brave.
As the chaos spiraled, Gardaí identified known dissident Republicans among the rioters. There was the chance the lone wolf bomber could be among them.
We knew nothing about this person. That person could be anywhere in the country. Indeed, the person could be in the vicinity of where the Queen was visiting.
With a bomber at large and the public at risk, Pat took decisive action.
The buses were going through full of people, cars were turning in and finding themselves in the middle of a riot. I said, no, we can't have this. People are going to get injured here. We have a duty of care to everybody around here. One of the options was we can bring in the public order vans. Instead of getting them all out, we can drive right up to them, hop out, pick the ringleaders and take them out of circulation. Everybody else will back off after that.
20 arrests were made for public disorder as Pat and his team restored the peace. In the Garden of Remembrance, the world was watching a very different scene as the Queen makes history.
To see the Queen of Great Britain and Northern Ireland really bow, and she really did bow on that occasion. I think the symbolism, again, that action, that sense of we are equals and I am here to respect your dead, was hugely, hugely significant.
This was the granddaughter of the last King of Ireland. This was, the wearer of the British crown, commemorating and remembering those who'd risen up and fought against the British crown not that many decades before. And not only did she lay a wreath, she bowed her head. And it was the bowing of the head which was really the most striking moment and the most powerful of symbols of reconciliation.
I think it just showed how aware she was of the legacies of the past, of the imperial shadows that had been cast, and her willingness to acknowledge them.
The Queen next visited Trinity College, which passed without incident, then retired to the official state guest house at Farmley.
Little bit is saying, great, you know, day one is done, but no claps on the back. You're straight into the next phase of the visit.
Pat had won his battle against the violent protesters, but he knew there would be more to come.
So the context for me had changed because they had turned out and they hadn't managed to affect anything really. So for me, for the following, I was saying, they're going to have to do something different if they want to get on the 6 o'clock news here. I was feeling at the time we could end up with something more the following night up at Dublin Castle.
The alerts around the city caused disruption to public transport, and there was a heavy Garda presence around O'Connell Street for the visit of Queen Elizabeth II.
Now on day 2 of her visit, Queen Elizabeth headed to Croke Park, another contentious location in Anglo-Irish history, where, in 1920, 14 civilians were gunned down by British forces during the Bloody Sunday massacre.
It was an unbelievably audacious move by her to go on sort of hallowed nationalist turf, given the history of 1920. But again, I think once the decision had been made by all sides that this was going to be the brave option of addressing the past, then it sort of fitted.
A ring of Gardaí surrounds the entire stadium for the duration of the royal visit.
This was a location that was going to have an impact nationally. This was GAA headquarters. And I think the GAA made a huge contribution by the way that they handled this.
Your Majesty, on behalf of the members of the Gaelic Athletic Association throughout Ireland and across the world, I'm delighted to welcome you to our headquarters at Croke Park.
The visit to Croke Park passes peacefully, but with a bomber still at large, a far bigger challenge was still to come.
The main event of the visit really was the state dinner in Dublin Castle, simply because it was the only time in the 4-day visit that she was going to actually make some kind of remarks or public address. So obviously there was huge interest in it.
It was always going to be a bit of a challenge. You're talking about Dublin Castle. I mean, it was the seat of British imperialism for so long. And I mean, it just, again, historically, it was always going to be sensitive.
Just a few hundred meters from Dublin Castle, at Christchurch, crowds of protesters gathered, and in far greater numbers than at the Garden of Remembrance.
They had something to prove now, because it hadn't worked for them the night before. They had to do something special tonight to get on the news, to become the issue or the item.
Have you heard us loud and clear?
Here we are in Christchurch now. Dublin Castle is about 3 minutes walk in this direction. Nicholas Street here on our right. And the protesters are already in the immediate vicinity here. They've been active now for about an hour. There's maybe 600 or 700 people here, protesters. Some of them have masks on, some of them have hoods up, so we know that there's an intention there, certainly with a certain cohort of the crowd. We could see the runners with the bags coming and going that had all of the stones and the bottles and the ball bearings and the bangers in them. So we knew that they were up for it tonight.
And somebody whispered in my ear, they have petrol. And I'll never forget it, just whispering it, they have petrol. So some people were there to legitimately protest. But there was a cohort there, a sizable cohort that were there, and they were there to do damage, there's no doubt about it.
With the threat of violence mounting at Christchurch, just 400 meters away, the Queen arrived at Dublin Castle. And Gardaí in Longford received another call from the bomber.
A person made a phone call again to Longford Garda Station. He initiated the conversation by saying, please record this conversation. I am a member of the Republican movement, Squad A, and there are 2 devices planted in Dublin Castle.
Gardaí were in no doubt it was the same man who had built the bomb on the bus days earlier.
The person who made the call described in quite a bit of detail the makeup of the bomb on the bus, so it was apparent that this person was familiar with that device, potentially had the capability of building a device like that.
It's the last place and the last time that you need to start panicking. People at the dinner weren't even aware of what was happening. So you make a call then at that stage. You know, the ultimate is evacuation. Do we remove the VIP? Do we remove other people? Do we remove everybody? If we're going to move the VIP, who goes? So again, all plan in advance how many vehicles we need. So your 20 vehicle motorcade is reduced to maybe F4. You know, there's a bubble within a bubble. So there's a whole range of options available to you. But there are options that you don't want to take because the threat maker has then won, which the whole purpose of it is disrupting the visit.
While Kevin and his team assessed the credibility of the bomb threat, Pat faced a street protest that was now turning violent.
The stones were coming over, there was bottles with fireworks in the bottles, so the bottles would break and the fireworks would explode, you know, and the glass shards were hitting their legs. And it was all to put forward the idea that these were explosives, that these were going to hurt them, that, you know, instill fear in them. I had already made up my mind at this stage. I wasn't going to stand and let them bring it up to a tempo where guards were going to be badly injured. And potentially, I mean, with 600 or 700 people there, it was going to be really, really difficult. I had an opportunity at this stage to intervene and prevent that.
Pat deployed the public order Gardaí to the front line. His plan was to charge the protesters, arrest the ringleaders, and disperse the crowd.
After we got them lined up, I can remember having a word and saying, I don't want to see any batons. I don't want anybody using the baton. And when I say stop, I expect you to stop.
As soon as I gave them the word, the guards sprinted out into the middle of the protesters. And the protesters were stunned. They didn't expect us to take action that early, but by the time they did, the guards were on top of them. The guards arrested the key ringleaders and the people that were carrying the bags. And they started moving them in here onto the footpath up against the wall where they could take their names and addresses, search them if that was necessary at the time. The rest of the protesters have gone either that way or that way. So effectively, it's over.
At Dublin Castle, the Queen was preparing to make one of the most important speeches in Anglo-Irish history. Meanwhile, Gardaí were assessing a double bomb threat made by a known bomb maker. Mick Feehan has to decide whether or not to evacuate the Queen.
That was a very serious decision, not taken lightly. One of the most serious decisions I probably took during my career. Had a device gone off, well then the implications of that would be enormous, whether somebody was hurt or not.
The things you have to consider on the night when you get the call is it conceivable that somebody got a viable explosive device in here? And you're hoping that you can make the call that the answer is no, they couldn't have. You're, I suppose, calling their bluff, if you like. But you're calling it with a weighted hand because you know all of the stuff that you've done.
Ultimately, the decision was mine. I had to make a decision as to whether I trusted the policing plan that we had put in place and the whole operation we had running, and I trusted that plan.
Agus a coisa. Prince Philip and I are delighted to be here and to experience at first hand Ireland's world-famous hospitality.
The Queen had spoken in a language outlawed by her predecessors for hundreds of years.
There was this jolt of electricity went through the room. I mean, we could feel it even up on the balcony. It was literally like a sort of a crackle in the room as people just went. Not only did she just say the cúpla focal, but she did it really well.
She said a few words of Irish to begin, and then she gave one of the most emotional, personal and political speeches that I have ever heard her give.
It is a sad and regrettable reality that through the history our islands have experienced more than their fair share of heartache, turbulence and loss. With the benefit of historical hindsight, we can all see things which we would wish had been done differently, or not at all.
And there was this really powerful message of we have to bow to history, but let's not be bound by it. Let's create a shared future.
I mean, everybody in the room understood, just the significance of that and went, okay, this really is, this is something special. This is going in a completely different direction than we thought it would be.
You knew as she spoke, you knew with the reaction of the President, Mary McAleese, with the words that were being uttered, you knew that this was happening, that this was a significant step in the attempts by two countries to address the past and to move on.
I think there's loads of moments in the visit that would have been lost, sadly, had there been interruption. That clip of her starting her speech in Dublin Castle, it's played over and over, and it's hugely significant. I suppose there's pride from all of us in Garda Síochána that whatever we did allowed her to be able to do that and continue with her speech, which was monumental for her to say and hugely significant.
The bowing of her head at the Garden of Remembrance, her visit to Croke Park, and now a historic speech. Ireland's attitude to the Queen's visit was changing.
I think those days just give people the opportunity and the capacity to say, I'm going out to see her, or I think it's brilliant, I think something has changed, and something did change, for sure, I've no doubt whatsoever about it. History was made, and it put to bed an awful lot of the past.
As this new national mood took hold, the Queen left Dublin and headed for Cork.
Where things really became relaxed, of course, was the visit to the English market in Cork. I mean, at that point, she was on a roll. She clearly felt very comfortable. And that wonderful image with the fishmonger and just this, the huge smiles all around and people just thinking, wow, this couldn't have gone better.
As they were exiting the market, her security were ushering her towards her car. But she could obviously hear outside, and for the first time, people were lining the streets right outside the door. She just turned around and went, no, I'm going out there, and turned on her heel and walked in the opposite direction, went straight out the door and straight over to the barricades and started shaking the hands of people.
She came up to the end of the barrier, and rather than getting into the car, she spotted up the road. It was a Republican protest march against her visit. She wasn't close enough to see, and she assumed they were supporting her visit, and she stopped to wave as we were kind of saying under our breath, will you get in the goddamn car? But obviously not saying that out loud.
I do remember seeing her security guys, and they were just like sweating bullets. They couldn't believe she had done that. But I think it was her only chance to really kind of say, thank you for the welcome. And I suppose it's funny, the rebel county was the one that actually got to give her the biggest welcome.
The Queen was due to fly home from Cork Airport. But hours before her departure, the Longford bomber made another call.
The phone call came in saying that there was another bomb in the airport, this time in Cork.
Calls continue in Cork Airport. We would have had a team down there. So again, you get to the stage of taking a threat, knowing what plans you have in place, knowing the geography, knowing the environment, knowing your teams, and then making a call of discounting them.
The airport was searched and nothing found. But detectives in Longford traced the caller's mobile phone.
On that Friday afternoon, the net was closing in on our suspect. We were now in a position to identify the person and to monitor directly his movements. Those movements brought us in the afternoon into Longford. He went into the shop to top up his mobile. When he came back out of the shop, he was approached by the Garda and he was found to have the mobile and the SIM card in his possession. In the vehicle at the time of his arrest was paraphernalia used in the making of the pipe bomb that was found on the bus in Maynooth.
With the bomber now in custody, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were escorted to their plane by Taoiseach Enda Kenny.
We didn't stand down until she was up in the air. And then I think everybody just collapsed. Everybody was absolutely exhausted. And they were running on false energy, but false energy brought about by their understanding of being part of something really special.
Days later, Gardaí identified the bomb maker as 61-year-old Donald Billings from Dublin.
Don was a Republican, very much involved in the IRA fight in the north in the 1970s. He was convicted up there on two accounts of possession of explosive devices, spent time in Lankesh. He went under the radar and obviously lived in Longford until the Queen's visit inspired him to carry out these acts. He was found guilty. He was given an 8.5-year sentence. Those covered 5 different offences. 1 offence of being in possession of an explosive device and 4 different offences of making false reports.
The Queen's visit is now regarded as one of the high points of Anglo-Irish relations.
I think the fact that it did go so well, I think it just took everybody by surprise. I think it took her by surprise, and I think it took both governments by surprise, and I even think the Irish people surprised themselves a little bit as well.
She really captured the hearts of so many people, I mean, with tremendous dignity and this sense of real respect for Ireland and her people.
I suppose when you step back from it, it is utterly remarkable that we're talking about a visit in these terms about a head of state going to a neighbouring country. But given the challenges of our history, the fact that she did it and pulled it off with aplomb, I think places it fair and square as one of the most important things she has done.
My own perspective, had I been asked to advise of the places where the Queen should not visit, I probably would have said, well, maybe don't go to Croke Park, maybe don't go to the Garden of Remembrance, and in hindsight, I would have been wrong.
It was one of the most positive experiences that I've ever had as a policeman. Despite all of the opportunities I've had and the challenges associated with that particular event, it's the one that stands out as the most enjoyable and fulfilling for me.
I applaud the work of all those involved in the peace process and of all those who support and nurture peace. It gives hope to other peacemakers across the world that through sustained effort, peace can and will prevail.